a little bit of a different video today. What is the easiest mast length to paddle up for downwinding and, well, basically in the flat water? So that's what I'm here to do. I have just gotten the new mast from Armstrong, so a bunch of different sizes, and it was the first opportunity where I could really test with the new performance mast which is easier to paddle up. So I've got the production downwind board. Mast lengths I'm going to test is the 655, 725, 795, 865. So for me, I always ran the 795, and primarily because the performance mast was so much stiffer and it was way faster. It was really slippery through the water. I learnt on the old 85 mast, and for me, I like longer masts. And everyone's been raving about, oh, shorter mast, but I just never had one. So now I've actually got the opportunity to test it, see what everyone's talking about. Guys always talk about shorter masts are easier to paddle up, but then lately James Casey came out and said, well, longer masts are actually easier because of the way it sort of swings under the water. It's got a lot going on there. But I'm just going to test them all, see which is easier. I'm probably going to do 3 paddle ups on each. I'm going to keep everything else the same. Fuselage, just a standard 60. I think that's what most people will run. So I'm just going to keep it simple. Tailwing, I'm going to run the new Glide 220. It's a big tailwing. For me, it's got a heap of lift, and I think for guys learning or looking to get into downwinding and learning, they're going to start on big gear. So same thing, I'm going to run the 1750 mid aspect. For me, it's a massive wing. I might actually do it on the 1475. I'll just give a feel, but I think most people are going to be running gear like that, like when they're learning. So working this out, what's easier to paddle up, I think is more applicable to guys riding bigger wings. So I'm going to keep it pretty big. And then paddle, I've got the Sonova. It's an 82 square inch paddle. For standards with downwinding, it is pretty well a tiny paddle. Most guys are running, or that I know, are running much like 95 square inch plus. Got things like the Ono Ava from Quickblade, that's 105 and 115 square inches. A lot of guys liking that, so I've just gotten used to this. So paddle size, I think PPC also, they're working on some bigger paddle sizes. So that's another whole video I could go into, but let's just keep it simple. Mast length, what is easier? So let's give it a crack. I'll set it up and show you what I'm running. Interestingly, the 1750 and the 1475 both have this third screw in the front. It's slightly shorter, I think it's 19.5 mil it said, but it's nice and gold, so it's easy to tell if you're putting the wrong one in. But yeah, something worth noting. I rate that. I like more screws the better. I think especially when you get to like bigger span wings, like the more solid that connection is, just reduce the amount of flex between the mast and the fuselage and the wing. I rate it. This thing's a beast of a wing. It is a big wing. I don't think I'll have too much trouble paddling it up. At least I hope I don't. That could be a fairly useless video then. But I started with the 795 mast. Now, the reason is the 865 is probably not what most guys are going to go to downwinding, and I think going down 3 different sizes is probably enough to test. I might test the 865 at the end, just to kind of confirm. So go from the 795, see if it's getting easier as I go down in mast size, jump back to the longer one, see how that feels. And if it is a lot, my thought is it's going to be harder, but let's just see what we find out with this video or with these testing. And yeah, no shim. I got the 220 Glide, no shim. I think that is what most guys will run. That's basically the most amount of lift you can get out of it, or out of the tail. So just gearing everything up for what someone probably learning to downwind, how they'd probably set their gear up. I've also put the mast at 11. I run my mast really quite far forward. I think you can see here, basically, you know, I put my feet probably front foot up here. So you see here, back foot sort of just in front, or I've got quite a narrow stance, but in front of the leading edge, or on the leading edge really. And to me, that just reduces the swing weight of the board, makes it easier to pump. So I'm a big fan of having longer boxes. There are reasons and there are instances where I do move the mast back a bit, but in general, I like it further forward. It just feels better, it surfs better, easier to pump. You're also having a longer or more area out the back of the tail. You get a little bit more push from the wave. So getting forward on the board, having a bit longer tail out the back, gets that initial push from the bump a little easier. So anyway, little things to think about. All right, get changed and get out there. First feel, 795's out the way. 1750 paddles up pretty easy. To be honest, it took me off guard mostly because it started lifting way earlier than I was expecting. I don't need a whole lot of board speed. With like the high aspects, you have to get quite a lot of board speed going first, then start working it up. But with this, it was like a few paddles and I could already feel it starting to lift. So yeah, that was took me off guard a few times, but done 3 paddle ups on the 795. Now I'm gonna do the same on the 725. See how we go. All right, this will be interesting. I just did the 725 and that was not at all what I was expecting. A lot of different feels. Got the 625 rigged, so, oh sorry, the 655 rigged. Looks tiny. I'm surprised how much smaller it looks. I need to ride this one to get a feel for what it does, and that might start confirming some of the things I've already felt, and I think I'm gonna have to ride the 865. Starting to get some feelings and understanding. Just did the 655. Things are starting to get an idea of what's actually going on changing the mast height. There is a lot of interesting things that I've uncovered, but it also meant I need to try the 865. I think that'll just confirm a couple of things for me. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things with different parts of the paddle up. Things like your board speed and things about trying to get that kind of paddle pump. The different masts did things differently at different times. So I think this would depend also on your front wing. So, oh God, I might try change front wing too. Oh, I don't want to do it all again. All right, let me jump on this one, see what it feels like. One last thing I want to test is high aspect versus mid aspect. So I'm going to a much smaller high aspect front wing. So I'm going to the 1125 compared to the 1750 mid aspect. And there were some interesting things I felt in how the board released off the water, and I have a feeling it might be to do with how big that surface area is. And as it's initially trying to lift, it's trying to lift that entire water column. The larger area of the front wing, the greater that water column is. So I'm curious just to quickly test back to back now, which one's easier. So this one, let's see, let's go. As expected, 865 with the 1125 was a lot harder to start with than the MA 1750, but there were also some very interesting learning feels. So last thing I'm going to do, God, I didn't think I was going to stop this many times. Whew. They're laughing at me. They're like, what is this idiot doing? I'm going to swap to the 655, get right down to the other end of the spectrum with the HA 1125, get a feel on that, and then I'm going to wrap it all up. Last change, I hope. Oh. done, finally. That took ages and I'm so cooked. That was way more paddle ups than I was anticipating. I thought I was just gonna do like 3 per setup and then probably have, 12 total for masts. Ended up doing it with the high aspect. Ended up doing way more than 3 for each setup because I wanted to get at least 3 clean paddle ups where I wasn't making mistakes, and it was more a clean paddle up where I was just feeling the differences in the setup and not me making the mistakes. So I'm totally cooked now. But some very interesting takeaways. Learnt heaps out of that, which was super interesting and not necessarily what I thought. So the first thing definitely in all of this is there are 2 phases to the paddle up where the mast really makes a difference. There is the initial section, I think, of the paddle up where you're just paddling straight trying to get board speed. And as you start to then feel a little bit of lift coming from the wing, then the second stage is after that. Once you're getting that little bit of lift, you start doing the kind of paddle pump, getting the board to release out of the water and trying to accelerate up onto foil. So considering those 2 sections, for the first, the shorter mast was way easier to get board speed up. So I mean, if you think about a mast in the terms of paddle speed, the longer that mast is, the more wetted area, the more drag it's causing, the wings down lower in the water. So it's trying to lift up a larger column of water to get up out of the water. So the closer the wing gets to the surface, the smaller the wetted area is, less drag, easy to get your initial board speed up. So for guys that are looking to paddle up or just trying to get into sort of flat water starts or downwinding, that short mast, it is easy to get that initial lift from the wing. But once you've got that initial lift, or you're starting the paddle pump technique, the longer mast is easier. Now, I know James Casey's the only one I've heard talk about this, and that's got to do with, as you're starting that paddle pump technique, you're kind of moving the board up and down, kind of trying to get it to go up, get some lift out of the wing, and then come back down. Try and get some drive on the way back down, and just keep releasing, touching down until eventually you get it out, and you can work it up on foil. Now, with the longer mast, think of it like a pendulum, kind of a swoop. The wing swoops underneath. So as you do that kind of movement, the wing swoops underneath quite quickly, and so the longer the mast is, the faster it'll move under and get that kind of lift going. So for me, once I got that initial lift out of the wing, the longer mast was actually easier to accelerate and get that final release and kind of get the board off the surface completely. So very interesting. I think with the big foils, like the mid aspect, like this one's a 1750 mid aspect, it was definitely easier with the shorter mast. Definitely. You got that board speed up really easy. It was fast, and then once you had that initial lift, because it's such a lifty wing, it was just easy to get out of the water. But once I got onto the high aspect, where you need to get to a higher initial speed, yes, it was easier with this, but once you then started getting it out of the water, your biggest thing with those high aspects is then the acceleration and getting it completely released out of the water. And that was easier on the longer mast. So I think for guys learning, yes, just go for the shorter mast with the big foils. If that's where you're at in your journey, definitely. But for guys wanting to size down or ride higher aspects with higher stall speeds, where you need to you've got a long journey to accelerating, a long path to accelerate it up to speed and get it to release, then yes, longer mast was actually easier. So, and as well, if you're a really strong paddler, that initial speed to get some lift out of the foil is not what you're after, or is not what you're concerned with. You're concerned with the technique of getting it up, and that's where the long mast was good. It was easy. So the last thing, which I think is an interesting point that was really noticeable through this, was the shorter mast was way more unstable laterally when you're standing on the board. So if you've just moved down to a longer, narrower board, and you're like looking to downwind, you're out in the bumps, that's going to be more unstable. If you're struggling with stability already, the shorter mast is more unstable. And if you're unstable and you can't put power down, you're not getting on foil. You need to be able to put power down to then get up on foil. So if you're looking like you've done a heap of flat water starts, you get out into the bumps and you can barely stand on your board and you can't put any power down. Sorry, there's a mozzie just flying around. We're gonna get out of here quick. Longer mast, for sure. That thing was way more stable laterally, so you can put the power down to catch the bump, get on foil. So that's another interesting point. If you are absolutely sweet with the initial, or with the stability, sure, go to a shorter mast. The shorter mast will be quicker, and that's mostly because, say if you're riding with the board 15 centimeters below, up above the surface, the closer that foil is to the surface, the faster it's going to be. Longer mast, foil's down deeper, it's going to go slower. Less drag, or more drag, it's going to be less glide, less speed. So yes, if you're looking to progress into the bumps and your stability is fine, shorter mast is definitely the way to go. But yeah, there was a lot of interesting takeaways from that. I learnt heaps about that, and I think there's no clear cut like shorter mast, easier paddle up. If you're on big, slow, low aspects, mid aspects that have just got so much lift and you don't need to accelerate up to speeds, sure, shorter mast is the way to go. If you're looking to paddle up faster wings, experiment with going longer. More stability out in the bumps, you can put power down, and then but easy to accelerate once you've got that initial lift. So yeah, a lot of interesting takeaways. I'm getting interested in how fuse length will affect that, but God, I got no more in me. That's for next time. But yeah, shoot us a message on Instagram, DM, whatever. Comment down below or whatever. I don't know how. Yes, you say that stuff. I've never said this stuff before, but shoot us a message. I'd love to hear if you've tried it and if you've felt something different. Yeah, just keep learning and seeing what works. But it is a very complicated dynamic. It is not clear cut. That's probably the disclaimer I need to put on like the title of this. But anyway, that was fun. Last thing, may not be obvious to everyone, but this is a dam. It's freshwater. Freshwater is way harder to flat water start. Way harder. For me, I normally don't struggle with the 1125 is a pretty easy one for me to start. So that'd be like, I'd say paddling up the 1125 in freshwater was like paddling up the 925 normally. So that was, yeah, keep that in mind.